Looking to have your groceries delivered? Try Instacart. By following the link in the show notes, you can shop multiple stores, get the products you love from local stores, and get your delivery in as fast as 1 hour. Plus, Instacart highlights deals to save you money. And for our listeners, free delivery on your first order over $35. Hi, this is Bob Trentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog, and I'm here today with Francisco Andragnes, and he's got some great stories about his Italian ancestors. So welcome, Francisco. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Bob.
So where are you located right now?
I'm in New York City.
Ah, okay.
And I was born in Argentina. I came to New York in the year 99, studied here, and then stayed here. But most of my closest family is in Argentina, and say my second cousins from my mother's side, they're all in Italy.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm originally from New York City, Queens to be exact, and lived in New Jersey for a while, and then we were in Florida, and now we're back to New Jersey. So I knew New York very well.
I can tell from your accent.
Of course, yes. So I'm going to start with, being that you're from Argentina, and I know a lot of Italians had gone to Argentina, but why and when did you start doing the family research?
So I started very young, and main reason was my grandmother every year, she used to go to Italy and spend the summer there and come back. I mean, the Italian summer, which was the Argentine winter, so she would escape the cold weather and come back 3 months later full of stories about this cousin and his other cousin and this sister of her, this brother-in-law of her. And it was extremely confusing for me to know who was he. So at one point I said, let's sit down and try to understand who is whose daughter, whose son, whose father. And we made a very rudimentary family tree, essentially fitting everybody that she kind of visited during her trips. And then from that, I kind of, with my obsessive personality, I was like, well, and what happened with this? And who's the father of this person? And who's this mother? So slowly ended up building her full, I would say, 2 generations up and everybody down. And then I said, okay, let's do the same for her husband, who had passed away. I never met my grandfather. But she kept in contact with all that family, so I made a family tree of that family. Then I was like, well, why stop there? So I sat with my dad's parents and made their small family trees. And then, like, from that, you start, what about, so you call your my grandfather's brother and ask him for his family, his information. And, like, I would say probably started very young. I don't know, might have been like 10 years old when I did this the first time, 10, 11th year. And then never stopped. Also, I think part of this is because, I think there's a lot of things that come from inside. One is my grandmother, in a way, was very attached to the Italian, to her Italian side, and we felt very attached to the Italian side as well. And in a way, having this tree and doing this research was a way to reclaim that Italian ancestry that somehow we felt in our genes, but we were not really living by being in Argentina, speaking Spanish. And although we spoke Italian at home, like, it's not the language you speak in the country. And then on my dad's side was a little bit different. Like, my grandfather had a very rough childhood. Like, his mother died very young. His father had abandoned him. And so completely disconnected from my father's origin and Basque origin, and kind of as well, all this research then evolved to understand a little bit where this lost family came from. That essentially became my number one, and I would say my biggest passion has been doing this research. I must have traveled to 30 different towns to visit their churches, their archives, their libraries, their cemeteries, visit second cousins, third cousins, distant cousins. I mean, sometimes people say, well, doing all this research is completely useless, but I have found it to be not only very interesting, but also I have been able to unite families that over time get completely separated. Like my father's family, for example, he hadn't seen his cousins maybe in 50 years or 40 years. I wrote a little book about some of the family, and we got all together to present that book, and they met each other. And by the end of the meeting, everybody was crying. And that happened a few times. I mean, to get together second, third cousins that barely knew about their existence, and sometimes getting people in Italy to meet each other when I'm from Argentina, having them to contact each other. So I feel that doing family research, it's good not only as a hobby, but I think it brings a lot of things to people. When people understand where they come from, it's it's a eureka moment. There's a lot of things that you have in yourself that you may not understand why, and many times there's a family reason why things are the way they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all get obsessive compulsive about this. Everybody I speak to says the same thing. The rest of the family, or a lot of the family, doesn't understand it, but we have something inside of us that make us want to do that.
They don't understand, but then when they see the results, they like it. Everybody likes my cousin sent me my family tree, and they show it to somebody else, or like, oh, my family comes from, I don't know, I have 10 generations of ancestry, and like they will show it eventually proudly. I feel that the process of finding it and discovering it and assembling it is probably even more gratifying than the actual result. But still sharing that result with other people, I think, may not understand why you get so obsessive, but they certainly appreciate in general.
Yeah, I agree. So I know your parents come from two vastly different regions in Italy, and I guess basically different economic status. So what I found was very interesting was that both sides were interesting, but the northern part that came from the Alps, you don't come from a lot of us that come from the farmers in the south. In my case, my mom his family were farmers from the south, and my dad's father, they were kind of gentry, but his mom was nobility. So to your point, same thing with you, they never would have met in Italy or had anything to do with each other. So let's start there with your family from the north.
I agree that.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
People from the south and from Liguria moved. I mean, they all emigrated because poverty struck, I think, much stronger. And normally people in the north, and I mean, Milan and Veneto, etc., they were better off, and they less likely to travel abroad. So my grandmother, as you correctly said, she comes from northern Italy. She was born in Milan, but her parents, one was from a small town called Sacco di Trento, and his mother was from also a small village called Lugo next to Vicenza. In Sacco, it's really very close to the border of Austria. Actually, when my grandfather was born, he's an Austrian citizen, and he had to almost nationalize Italian, I believe, to marry his wife. That little place called Sacco, next to a slightly bigger town called Rovereto, it's where like the Adige River makes like a L shape, and because of that, it was a point where people would bring wood. They would cut the wood from the woods in the base of the Alps and bring them down the river. And in that point, because of the shape of the river, was a great place to take the wood out. So there's a huge industry called zattieri not industry, a trade of zattieri, which means of people that use barges. So they would make the barges out of the tree they would cut. They would put more trees on top of that, and then export it in a way to places like Verona, Vicenza, all along the rivers. The Adige, if I'm not wrong, it connects to the Po River and etc. So her grandfather, my grandmother's great-grandfather did that. Her oldest son did that. The younger son, rather than doing this hard work, he became an agent he would trade that wood and sell it. And he married the daughter of one of the owners of these woods that would sell the wood to the zattieri, and had a few children, including my great-grandfather. Actually had like 5 children, but their mother died very young. The father died also very young, so they were found orphans very young. Their uncle supposedly took care of them, but actually took all the money from the family and ran away. So these little kids were completely abandoned. My great-grandfather's brother was a little bit older. He had become an engineer, and he started working in a paper company that probably had traded with his I would assume with his father, and started running that paper company. And in a way, he paid for the education of all the other children. One was sent to Austria to become a doctor. My great-grandfather also studied to become, a business person, and they all then moved to this town in Lugo, where this cartiera or paper mill was located. And that's where my great-grandfather met my great-grandmother. She was the daughter of the mayor of the town. This mayor was a very colorful person. He had fought with Garibaldi in the independence war of Italy. So, of course, being Garibaldino, he was at odds with the priests of the town that were anti-Garibaldi because of the fight between the Garibaldi and the Pope. And then, they moved to Milan, but my great-grandfather also died very young. And so my grandmother went back with her mother to this town of Lugo, and spent probably her youth there. She left very early the family, and was sent as like kind of an au pair to an English school in the UK. She spoke no English. She was, in a way, almost dirt poor, because she was also orphaned very young. The World War I had created a lot of inflation in Italy, and in a way evaporated the little funds the mother had kept from her father's death. And so she went to Italy, to UK, became this started learning English by working in this school. Then she came back to Italy, and by that time Mussolini had in a way consolidated power in Italy, and wanted to project a very strong Italian presence abroad. So she was hired, as many others, as a teacher to instruct or to teach Italian culture, and she was sent to Alessandria in Egypt. Alessandria was, even if it's in Egypt, had a very, very strong Italian colony. and she became a teacher in that in the Italian School of Alessandria. Spent a few years. I think even one of the things probably she regretted the most was leaving Alessandria, because she really loved. I think she must have had a really good time there. So after Alessandria, she was sent still by the Italian government to the UK, and she became the headmaster of Italian school in London. And there, my grandfather, who was very much younger than her, he was a young economist. He had recently graduated from Genova in maritime economy, was invited as a guest speaker in her school. And somehow it must have been love at first sight. I mean, she fell in love with this much younger man, and they started dating in the UK. So yes, they met. They would have never met in Italy. My grandfather came from. He had studied in Genova, but his family was from the south. His mother was from very close to Naples, a town called Meta di Sorrento. And his father was from Trapani, which is like the southern westernmost point of Italy, in Sicily, almost, very, very close from Tunis, in Africa. So for them, in a way, the southern Italians, they would rarely assimilate with the northern Italians. The northern Italians would call them terroni. I'm sure the family initially wasn't super in favor of her dating somebody from the south. But actually, my grandfather was a very accomplished professional. He had done very well in school. He then had a very good career. So, and in a way, I would say probably he came from a wealthier family than my grandmother, who kind of was the young orphan of a young orphan of a young orphan. And my grandfather's family, let me talk a little bit about them. They are as I said, they came from both Naples and Sicily. The Naples side essentially was a family of ship owners and captains. So his father was a captain, his grandfather was a captain, his some of the family there, like the Cafiero family, which is one of those ancestors, they were like the admirals of the king of the two Sicilies when they were in the 19th century. So it's a family of essentially shipbuilders and ship owners, and still today, I believe there's lots of distant family members in that industry. And on his my grandfather's father's side, they came from Sicily, from Trapani, and Trapani essentially at that time had two industries: the industry of canned tuna and the industry of salt. And the salt was used to salt and preserve the tuna. So if I do my research on that side, which is Piacentino is the last name, for decades and decades and decades they ran the salt mines in Trapani. It's even funny. I did one of the family reunions with lots of my mom's cousins in Trapani a few years ago, and we went to visit the salt mines. So it was a beautiful one with like a windmill, and like, because it's the windmills that kind of move, are used to press the salt and to move the water and things like that. So we were there. We all get into the salt mine, which kind of looked like there was nobody there, and then suddenly caretakers can say, "Hey, you cannot be here in this. This is a private property." Like, "Oh, but our family used to be in the salt mine industry, so we wanted to take some pictures." So no, but this you cannot be. This is owned by the Piacentino family. I say, "Oh, we're Piacentino." So suddenly we were taking pictures in the salt mine that had been our family's, ancestors' salt mine many many centuries ago. So yeah, then I mean my grandfather and my grandmother moved to Argentina. Argentina at that time was, I'd say, very different than now. It was certainly a country full of promise, full of economic prospects. Um, Probably at some point, about 70% of the population in the city were Italian immigrants. I mean, or first or second generation descendants. My grandmother likes to say that at that time, Buenos Aires felt like a British colony inhabited by Italians who spoke Spanish, because all the businesses were British, the population was Italian, but nobody spoke Italian. I know the reason they didn't speak Italian was that some of the people came from Napoli, some came from Genova, some from Piemonte, and some from other areas, and each one spoke their own dialect. They were very poor people, mostly farmers or people that had got impoverished in Italy, who I would say between the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century was really in very bad shape. So nobody spoke Italian. So Genovese would meet with a Napolitan, and they would not understand each other. So they ended up speaking to each other in Spanish, not in Italian, not in Genovese, not in Napolitan. So in that sense, the population assimilated very quickly. I feel probably something similar must have happened in the US, where also people from Italian origin would not be able to understand themselves. However, the Spanish language was significantly easier for an Italian to learn. And I feel that's why we had so much Italian immigration in Argentina, because not only you had lots of support, family associations, benevolent associations, and things like that to help the immigrants, but also in a way, it was a language that with a few months of practice, it wouldn't be that different from the language you spoke.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And my parents, my dad's from Naples and my mom was from Bari. And, when they spoke Italian to each other, they were always, you're not speaking it correctly. And I know from, the little Italian that I learned and, some of the school that I took, although I don't speak it very well at all, but the Barese is vastly different than most Italian dialects. But my Naples connection is, like I said, my dad's family is from there. His father was studying to be a priest, actually. And my grandmother's carriage broke down in front of the seminary. He helped her repair it, or helped whoever repair it, and they gave him a ride someplace, and that was it. He wound up leaving the seminary. His parents, his father, was an attorney who later became a Supreme Court justice in Naples, and my great grandmother's family, they were all attorneys. My grandmother, as I said, she was from two noble families, Piramalo and Caracciolo. And Caracciolo, they're huge in Naples. They go back in Naples to 950. So quite possibly, and most assuredly, they probably had some kind of connection to your shipbuilding ancestors, because they lived right there.
Very likely.
Yeah, they lived right there on Via Carbonaro, and when I look at my mom's family's birth and death certificates, they all say mostly farmer with a seamstress thrown in there every once in a while, and my grandmother's family were the occupations. Sometimes it says landowner, sometimes property owner, and in a couple of cases it just said rich person. So,
yeah, they didn't. They supposed not to work sometimes when they were rich people. I think one of the things that probably you noticed in your genealogy is the food as well. I mean, if you're from Bari, probably your grandmother used to do orecchiette. Like, I feel that when I look at the things that my mother cooks, I feel like, oh, this is from her. This is like, who taught you this? Oh, this was taught my grandmother. Yes, of course, this is a Napolitan lasagna. Or this couscous, we would do it because my grandfather used to do it because that's the food they would do in Sicily. Or my grandmother who used to, I don't know, like risotto because she would come from, like, I feel there's a lot of um, understanding your origins sometimes help you understand why you eat what you eat, why you were fed in the way you were fed, why you like olive oil or you prefer butter. Or so also there's a, I feel when you look at um, the family history, it's not just why we are where we are, but why we do the little things we do, why we talk in the way we talk, why we treat our families in a way that's different from other people that have different origins, that come from different countries. Or I think one thing that most Italians have in common is a very strong sense of family and family connection. And you may never have met a cousin, but you meet them, and it's like if you were always their family, like it's if you had been grown up together almost, because it's a way they are brought up to be, which is, I think it's very fascinating as well.
We'll be right back.
Lafayette, we are here. The French history podcast for the American public by a Frenchman. Learn all about France's fascinating history, its great characters like Charlemagne, Joan of Arc, Louis XIV, or Napoleon, but also the great events that marked France, Europe, and sometimes the whole world. Lafayette, we're here. Available wherever you get your podcast or on LafayettePodcast.com. À bientôt.
Yeah, and we were actually supposed to go in April. Of course, that got canceled, and then we pushed it till October. But I don't think, well, that's not going to happen. So we're shooting for next May. But I had lined up probably somewhere around 20 or so third and fourth cousins from my grandmother that I never knew existed till I started doing this. I mean, I didn't know my grandmother, my dad's mom, had any family there at all. And we were going to meet them, and they were excited, we were excited, and but exchanging photos and things like that back and forth through Facebook, the family resemblance is amazing. And the one time we did go to Italy, like you said, you feel very connected there, like somehow you've gone home in a sense. But I know I believe you sent me a photo, I think of a photo of someone that was either a count or a baron in your family, yeah?
Oh, yes. That's on my father's side. His last name is, his mother's last name is Morando. And Morando was a family of traders in Genova and in a town called Crocefieschi. Today there's nobody left in Crocefieschi, but with the Morando last name, actually the town has shrunk a lot as well. But if you go to the church, you still see there's the three families, the three kind of rich noble families of that town build the church and build little chapels inside. So you have the Morando chapel inside. And there's the family crests outside the church of the three families. And I think in the end of the 18th century, all the revolutionary movements, they went and they destroyed, because it was the old nobility, and went again all the revolutionary Jacobin kind of movement. So, but the kind of the famous Morando, which is this Count Morando, he was a poet in the 17th century and a writer, and he's I don't descend directly from him, so I wouldn't say that I have that noble origin, but we do have ancestry in common. He wrote a very interesting document that is one of those things that you find and say, this is amazing, that shows all the genealogy of the Morandos from the 15th century to the 17th century where he wrote it. And there's a little addendum where they show what happened from his death afterwards for another 100 years. And I would say he's a fairly known poet for the people who specialize in researching 17th century or 16th, 17th century Italian literature. I mean, when I went to Crocefreschi trying to see if there was any family left, etc., it's like everybody knew the last name Morando, but yeah, there's no Morandos left here. And we went to the house where probably my great-great-grandfathers used to live and before they came to Italy, and there was there's a little agri hotel, they call it I would call it it's like like a hotel that's in, or a little Madame hotel, like almost bed and breakfast in a farm, so you kind of live a little bit of the farm life, and that's what the old house has become. But you still smell the family there, because you see the church, you see people kind of, when you ask people around, say, oh yes, Morando, yes, like it is a name that people remember. Of course, in Crocefreschi, the main family is the Fieschi family, which that was high nobility. I would say the nobility of the Morando came more from the work that this poet made that was so relevant at that time that he became noble for that reason. But I mean, if you do, they always say, if you do enough research, everybody in their family ends up having a connection to a royal family, and like everybody in their family has connection to a beggar and a criminal, and there's the more you research, the more you find. Like, for example, one of the interesting things on the Trapani side, one of my ancestors, I think the last name was Salerno, if I'm not wrong. She was hung from because of it's like they were hung because they said they were witches, and essentially because they were strong women that were disobeying their husbands and their priests' commands. Other kind of dark, colorful stories. One of my ancestors, also from the Sicilian side, but who was living in Naples at that time, like found his wife in bed with the priest of the town and shot both of them. and I think, I don't know if he was absolved because of a crime of passion or not, but that certainly must have been a very traumatic event for the family. The funny thing is, some of these traumatic events, which are pretty close, nobody talks about. So you only find about them when you're doing your research, when you find old papers of the area, when you find the certificates, like, oh, there may be a reason why they never spoke about this story in our family. I'm sure my grandfather knew about it, but why? Maybe it's not the best stories to tell, but I think once you are 2-3 generations detached from those stories, they add color to your family, they add color to your research. You cannot just do a family tree full of names and dates. You want stories. The more stories you can find, the more fun it is. So that's why sometimes the research documents that are the most interesting are the newspaper articles, or that old articles you find, or the wills where like they leave something to one of the children and not to the other, and sometimes they explain why they're doing that, or the marriage or the sale of property, or like you see or they buy a new property. Like all those notary documents sometimes are super interesting. Like there's this story about how my grandfathers on the Napoli side, like his grandfather was last name was Esposito. However, he changed his name to Cafiero because Esposito, he was called Esposito because he was abandoned and taken by a family and taken care as their son. And eventually he became this big captain and maker of ships. But his through his wife, which was a Cafiero, that's how he entered in that industry. But you see all the letters that he wrote to his wife about why they had to change their name and the process, and then you go to the public registry and see all the Esposito last names crossed over with Cafiero written on top. One of the reasons they did that was because one of their sons wanted to become a priest, and with the Esposito last name would be very hard to be to make progress in the church, because it means like, I mean, the church was very snob in a way at that time. Maybe still. So the whole anecdote of changing the last name, and that's one that has been kind of told later in the family. But yes, I fascinated with stories of stories. Like I found a letter written by my grandmother's grandfather when he left Sacco di Trento and went to Lugo, and the whole fights he had with the city because of the way that they had been treated when they were orphans, and saying that he ends this letter with one of sentence that says, "I'd rather kill myself than ever set foot on Sacco di Trento again." So I found it. I mean, again, it's colorful. It's colorful going to Sacco di Trento and find in the public library this letter about how the family hated Sacco di Trento.
That's really something, for sure. Yeah, I have. Although he's not a direct ancestor, he's probably some sort of, great uncle or something like that. We had Admiral Francesco Caracciolo, who fought in the American Revolution, but for the British, actually. He was a famous Italian admiral, and he was, when he got back to Italy, he was hung on his own ship by the Italian government for, I suppose, being part of the American Revolution on the wrong side, or something like that. But I want to explore some of your Basque and Spanish roots, because you mentioned also that you go way back there, as do I. I have directs again through my grandmother's mom back to Castile and Leon and the Aragona, many Aragona marriages in my grandmother's family, because when Spain conquered Italy, there wasn't enough Spanish nobility in Italy, so the Spanish started marrying the Italian nobility. And I also go back to Navarre, and there are a few Basque families that I trace back to in the late 1400s, early 1500s.
I found doing the family research in the Basque country that if you look a little bit, everybody's related. It was such a closed, in a way, area that people would, within the valley, everybody that's from the same valley, somehow eventually it's a cousin to each other. But yes, my last name is Andragnes, which is a Basque last name, Basque French. I guess probably it was pronounced Andragnes. When I started this, nobody had any clue where we came from, which town, which part of the Basque country. We're Basque French because the last name was GN and not with Ñ. And I would say that was the biggest frustration of my research, because I had got a lot of information on my mother's side, on my father's mother's side, and I had no clue where Andragnes came from. And then, well, of course, the magic of internet. One day I found in one blog that a great woman called Christine Bidot does, where she's always transcribing immigration records and other records. And I found like, oh, there's this Pedro Andragnes, which is called like my great grandfather, and she says she comes from this town. I was like, and suddenly, and my mother was the one that found it and sent it to me, and we contacted her, and she was amazing. She found his birth certificate. We were able to confirm that he was exactly the same person. Found where he was born, and then like 2 years later, I went there to visit her and to the archives to see the information, and well, it turns out the Andragnes have been living in a town called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. I mean, were from a town called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is exactly in the border between Spain and France. It's where there's this annual peregrination that they make called the El Camino de Santiago. I don't know the English name. Like the St. James Way, I guess, where people go to this Church of Santiago, so people would come all the way from France and Spain, etc., to the church, and the ones coming from France, they would all go through this town because it was the only passage of this very tall Pyrenees, either through there or you had to go all the way to the border in the ocean. So on the main street of that town, it's like where all these little a beautiful UNESCO preserved road called the Rue de la Citadelle. And I know, walking down the Rue de Citadelle, suddenly I look up and I see one of the houses says Miguel Andragnes, 15, I don't remember, 1568. I don't know exactly the year, but it's like, oh, wow. And then doing my research, well, that was the family, that was the house where 8 generations of my family had lived. So it was amazing to see, like, we were still preserving this sign that my, 11th direct ancestor from my father's side had built and had put his name on top. And that's where every person whose last name is Andragnes descends from. And the reality is that the only Andragnes left were all in Argentina, were all second or third cousins. But with my research, I found many other people that had an Andragnes ancestor, even if their last name was not Andragnes, living in Spain, living in Argentina, living in the US and in other places. Discovering where the Andragnes came was like it gave sense to all of us. We were hundreds of Andragnes in Argentina that had completely no idea about where we came from or why we had moved or when we had moved. So 1855, they moved to Argentina, and that was almost the end of Andragnes, except one of my great-great-grandfather's cousins was still left in this little town. And then that person became, so he was called Hubert Andragnes. He became a banker and moved to Mexico. And he created a very big bank in Mexico called the Bank of Paris, and kind of the Bank of Paris in Mexico, Compañía Bancaria de París, and became very important in Mexico and had, like, you see all these pictures of him next to the president, him in all the books, etc. Again, some people had no idea, but through the internet, slowly researching, I was able to find a lot of information of this ancestor. But he never married, he never had children, and then at the end of the day, he moved back to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, where he kept working as banker there for a while, but then he got sick with rheumatism, and eventually, he passed away. And almost that story goes completely forgotten. Like I went to the cemetery, the town was completely abandoned, full of weeds, etc. But doing this research, I was able to rebuild the story of this Umberto Andragnes. And doing the research, I go to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and there's this person, Jacques Scand. He's like in his mid-90s. He's like, Andragnes, oh, I remember Umberto Andragnes. I was a child, and he was really interesting person. And there were these 2 or 3 people that were like the kind of I don't know, like anti-church, but very, very relevant. Like he started telling me all these stories about how they were, and like, so it was another of those moments where suddenly you go to a town and you thought that the Andragnes family had completely evaporated from that town, but there were still people that remember him. So I wrote a little book about the story of Umberto, and I included the memories, and that the only person left who remembered the cousin of my great grandfather, who had probably, this person was like 10 years old when Umberto died in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. I cannot say I have a connection with that strong connection with Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. There's very little of these Basque traditions that have translated to us, but it was really nice actually to discover this.
Yeah, that's really something. And like you said, sometimes, the discovery is the whole thing. You find a little clue, or you find one little piece of information, and it's, in my case, sounds like with you too, or most of us, you can't stop until you find it. I had a similar thing. My great grandmother was from Lucerne in Switzerland. And that came as a surprise to me, because I never would have expected that any of my Italian roots I would have an Italian great grandmother. I mean, a Swiss great grandmother. And I thought for a long time, I'm never going to make this connection. This is going to be impossible. And one day I was just browsing on the internet, and I came across the registry of the Neapolitan army before unification, so somewhere around, I think, 1860 or something like that. And my great grandmother's last name was Mohr, Mohr. And I found a Captain Bernardo Mohr from the Swiss Guards in Naples. And I was like, I thought the Swiss Guards just guarded the Pope, but apparently they didn't. The Catholic cantons, especially Lucerne, would hire out mercenaries, and he was a mercenary, assigned to the Neapolitan army. Well, as I'm going through the list, I find my great grandfather's name, and he was a lieutenant in the horse cavalry in the Neapolitan army. Probably 21 years old or something like that. My great grandmother was around 18 at the time, and they must have met at maybe some function or something like that, and they wound up getting married.
And he stayed there in Napoli?
In Napoli, yeah. So now I have this connection. So I'm again browsing around, and I come across this site that says, if you're looking for records, ancestor records in Switzerland, actually I think it may have been, no, I think it was Switzerland in general. Write us in English, Italian, or French, or German, and we'll answer you. So I said, well, I have this connection to Bernardo Mohr. He was my third great grandfather, and anything that you have, will be grateful. Well, they sent me a link to a website that had all the prominent families from Lucerne, their family trees going back to the 1400s. So I was able to connect my great grandmother to all of these prominent families there. I found one, and the name is Amrine, And I guess it goes back maybe 5 generations. And I asked them there, and they sent me a picture of a family crest in Lucerne that had the combination of my second great grandfather and my second great grandmother, the Caracciolo family crest. And even though they didn't have nobility in Switzerland, I guess they had some sort of crest or something like that. The two of those crests combined, and their names in Latin on it. So,
Wow.
You find one little clue, and a lot of people would just let it go, but us, we can't let it go.
Yeah, and the happiness you get when you see those things, no? It's like it justifies months and months of like going through documents and not finding anything, and then you find a clue to a family crest. I mean, or things like that. It's like, wow.
Yeah, exactly. And my whole research started with my great grandfather. I call it a calling card. My grandmother bought a box of these from Italy when she came. So it was probably from around 1910 or 15 or something like that, with his name on it and the family crest. And that's kind of where I started my research. And, never thought in a million years I would wind up finding what I found out. We all have that similar kind of drive. And, I talk to people, and, one person told me, who's, like, she's like a spiritualist. She said, it's not an accident. They want to be found. And some of us are just given that drive, or that, whatever you want to call it, that we have to know about these people in the past.
That's a very nice thought.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating, because not everybody has it. Not everybody has it. And, I have a pretty big family, and, outside of one or two of us, nobody's really that interested. But like you said earlier, when you find something, they all excited about it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Francisco. This has been fascinating. I love talking about this. Your stories are extremely interesting, that's for sure.
Thank you very much. I love talking about this, so I thank you for the opportunity, and I commend you for. I mean, your blog is extremely interesting. Your podcast as well. I've been listening to a few of them, and I think I'm very honored you chose my story as well to be in it. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy group, or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.